Well, we know the federal government is slashing budgets left and right. And earlier this month, we told you how the CIA offered to buy out its entire workforce. So what would be left? Here to break it down for us is Drew Berquist. He's a former counterterrorism officer and host of This Is My Show with Drew Berquist. So Drew, thanks so much for joining us. So with the rise of the CIA, right? If this goes to ashes, do we even need this around anymore?
Well, thanks for having me, first and foremost. Yeah, I mean, look, we do. We need the functions and capabilities, the good parts, if you will, of the agency and some of my former colleagues. But we don't need what it's become over time, this politicized, weaponized, just behemoth in D.C. The part that happens and exists back here in Washington and just in the U.S. writ large is a absolute mess. Some of the stuff that happens overseas, a different story. That's good, and we need parts of that. Where it lands and how it all ends up is I guess TBD. But this is definitely an interesting story that's unfolding.
So, Drew, everyone has their reform plan, out and about these days. Actually, there should be more of them. I mean, this is a time where everyone is, for good reason, rethinking what these different organs of the government ought to be doing. Right. And so it's about getting rid of the people who shouldn't be there, getting rid of these bad things. But I keep on hammering on, we got to have a vision for what the purpose is, right? We got to go back to what the purpose of these organizations are and then reform them accordingly. So in your view, what should Ratcliffe do? What is that purpose? And then what falls away?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, as is the case with almost all of the organizations in D.C., there's so much bloat, there's so much overstaffing. So you've got to address that. And you get to what you're talking about. What is the mission? What do we need this entity or this organization to do? And in the case of the CIA, it's collecting vital intelligence that provides that information to the president, the National Security Council, on how we should address certain issues and proceed ahead. And then there's the more clandestine stuff that we do, where we're taking out bad guys and doing God's work overseas, all around the world, that most people don't know about. And it's those things. It needs to be precise. It needs to be, laser specific, very precise operations that address U.S. national security concerns and or U.S. national security interests. And that's the same thing across the board for all these organizations, whether you're talking about the military or FBI or you name it. But it has to be very specific. And the tools that work at the agency, I keep saying this to so many on my show and so many other shows that I go on, the tools that really work at the agency we need. They're critical to our national security. The problem is like so many other things, that's like a few percentage points, right? And then the rest of it is just, you have multiple, moments from Office Space where you're asking people and seeing people in the building. It's like, what is it that you'd say you do here? Like, I don't understand what your function is. And so we need to get rid of all of that and then just let the operators go operate and do the critical work that does keep our country safe.
That makes total sense to me. Just as a follow-up, though, what should he do to keep it for this agency that does do some vital things in the national interest, as you point out? What should he do to stop it from being involved in really domestic affairs? I think that's what's terrified people over the years, right? Yeah. Is that this is intelligence looking to the outside and the rest of the world. As you point out, there still is a lot of talent on the side of going out and getting things done out in the world. But I think what most Americans are afraid that it has happened and don't like about the direction is this shouldn't have much to do with what's going on inside our borders at all. No?
100%. You're absolutely right. Well, the CIA is chartered for overseas. Everyone's got their charter and their specific left and right limits of what they can and cannot do. And the agency's chartered for overseas operations. So there's never really, with the rare exception where obviously, a terrorist that's been tracked has come overseas, at which point then the way it should be is they collaborate with FBI or some other, DOJ component to get things done. But there's not really a charter or a mission for the CIA within the United States. So that has to go away. And you have to get away. A lot of this will go away with reducing the bloat, right? You get rid of all these people who have an office in D.C. and they go to meeting after meeting and they sit at the Starbucks that's in the first floor of Langley and they talk about things that they think are doing things, but they're not really, like they're just a bunch of mouth breathers. You get rid of that and you get rid of that bloat, and that will take care of most of the stuff that happens here at home, because it's those people who kind of go rogue the leadership and some of these other people that the leadership leverages because they're just willing pawns in the game to do the stuff that happens here at home. Most of the real operational folks are focused on operations overseas. So I think that you will address some of those concerns by getting rid of the Karens and the Chads that work back here that no one knows what they even do.
Well, Drew, I want to ask you about the White House press briefing today because they brought up the Trump assassination. And I thought, man, it's been a minute since we've actually talked about that. One of the reporters was asking, are we going to get some more transparency on this? And Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, said she'll leave it up to the president, but she believes in full transparency. We will get some more information. So what can we expect to see on that regard?
Well, first of all, I think it's great because, this thing has been memory hold. We've had 2 assassination attempts on a presidential candidate, and it just has all been memory hold. So much of the stories that led up to this election, memory hold. And also thank you to you guys on the left and within the government who tried to do it because you gave us the election victory. But I think that, look, I would have told you weeks ago, pre-inauguration, don't expect much. Because that's just what we're used to, right? We're used to all these promises, and we hope that we're going to get more information, and we hope we're going to make progress on certain issues or certain policies, and we just historically don't because D.C. is a failure of a town. But what we've seen in these few weeks is so mind-blowing, and so it's just like this amazing thing that's going on where we're getting access to all this information. So now I would say I would expect that we're actually going to get, will we get names? Maybe not, but will we get, hey, the Bureau or DOJ or this organization or Secret Service was involved in this, and here's where these lapses occurred. I think that we're going to get more than we would have in any previous administration before. What that is, I don't know because I haven't heard anything from the inside to tell you for sure, but I do think that we're going to get more than we ever would have in the past.
That would be amazing. I'm with you on that. Everyone's attitude, by the way, right? Pre and post. Before, it's like, well, nothing ever happens. And then that transition team did a heck of a lot of work in the last 3 months, and we're watching it all now. And now we're all imagining things we couldn't have imagined. For instance, Tulsi, DNI. That is something that was unimaginable not very long ago. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's great. I'll say this. I think that the DNI has never lived up to, I was never a big proponent of the DNI. I think adding layers of bureaucracy, DHS, DNI, all the things that happened looking at UW weren't necessarily great for this country. But once they're there, if we're going to keep them, we need to make them useful. And to make them useful, we have to have useful and good, smart people who are in that position. I think that there's a lot the DNI can do right to kind of collaborate and get rid of some of the mission creep that happens between FBI and CIA, for example, some of the other intelligence organizations that are collecting intelligence. And I think that she's just an absolutely wonderful person for the job. I did not think that she was going to make it through, so I'm thrilled to see that she did. I'm thrilled at the prospect of RFK and others making it through. It's kind of like pre and post inauguration stuff. Mm-hmm. Pre inauguration, you tell me, or let's say post cabinet picks. You tell me that all these people are going to make it through, and I laugh at you. And there's just so much winning going on. I see these people going through. We all do. It's like, man, we might get RFK through too. We might get Cash through. Like, let's just see how this all shakes out. It continues to be good, but I think that the DNI, operationally speaking, doesn't have a whole lot that it brings to bear. But there is a lot that it can do to kind of help clean up some of the stuff that has been going on. And I think Tulsi's going to be great at that. Yeah,
I want to go back to that because you bring up some important points, and one of the points of our show, the mandate, is to help explain to people every day, what is going on, what's the structure of the beast, the agenda, the mandate is trying to be implemented and tame right across this colossus. So it's really important to explain this. I mean, you said earlier, part of CIA's mission is to provide intelligence to the executive, and DNI, what's DNI's mission? How do you see those two agencies? How do you explain that to regular people?
So basically what happened is there was, and there always will be, it's like, you think of Army, Navy, you think of any of these kind of rivalries where we're all really on the same team, but there's a rivalry there. And you get mission creep where someone who's supposed to, the FBI's chartered to do law enforcement operations, counterintelligence and intelligence operations here at home. And then overseas stuff is us. And, they wear suits, and then, there's the cool stuff that happens overseas that we do. And there's just this clash. And what happens is you have people trying to do the same job. So I'm meeting this asset who's got information to this. Well, I'm meeting this asset who's got the same thing. And rather than collaborate and coordinate, it was a race to whoever can get the best information fastest, and really not even the best. It was usually, just, if we're being honest, the fastest information, so they get credit, because a lot of these government people just want promotions and they want to play that game. So the DNI was created with that mindset: is let's deconflict all this, let's bring it together. The problem is it was never going to work because that rivalry is there. So when you tell senior level agency people, take the DCI, which has been a mess of a position, granted, over the last several decades here, going back even further than that, in fact. But you tell the DCI, who's the most powerful person, in terms of government agencies outside of the president, that now he's got a new boss who doesn't work in his building, and the same thing for the chief at the bureau. And it just never was going to really work. So you have analysts who are now plopped over there, and now you're supposed to be the final analyst there, where the agency was supposed to be before. So there's a culture. It was a cultural nightmare when it worked. It was a bureaucratic nightmare because it added another layer, more meetings, more red tape, and it just is, unfortunately, the way the government works. The same thing happened with DHS. Did we need DHS? No, we didn't. Has it been successful since? No, it really hasn't. It's all been kind of a mess. But DNI, I think, was actually probably one of the biggest failures during that era, because it was the most unnecessary. If people would just stay in their lanes and stick to their charters, it would be irrelevant. But again, if we're going to have it, let's have someone good run it.
Absolutely. Drew, if we go back to our theme of pre and post, I think USAID is one of the biggest headline grabbers that we've seen so far. There is USAID front group that drove the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. So do you think that the FBI was aware that this was a government-funded smear campaign when it launched the Mueller probe?
I think that there's probably elements within. I think what a lot of people do on the outside is tend to assume you've got a clearance, you work for this organization, you know a lot of things that are going on. And it really is pretty, sometimes in a good way, sometimes to our own detriment. It's siphoned off into silos pretty well, where if you're not in this program and read into this program, you don't know, which is how these things happen and why these organizations have such credibility issues. You have great FBI agents, you have great CIA officers who don't know that leadership or this program or this group is doing these nefarious things that are going to crush the credibility of organizations forever. So I think that there's individuals who knew and were aware, and certainly when it comes to the agency, there's individuals who knew and were aware. But I don't think it's everyone sitting around the water cooler getting a drink at the end of the day, like, wish we weren't doing that. I think it is pretty specific, and who knows. And hopefully those people are gone, and hopefully they're punished to the greatest extent possible, because we got to set new precedents here.
All right, last question. I want you to respond to this quote. I saw it today from Mike Benz. He said, if it's too dirty for the CIA, they give it to USAID.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think of this. We use cutouts and cover organizations all over to funnel things to hide our hand in operations. So, and it's true. I mean, we get involved in some bad stuff, and sometimes you want us involved in that bad stuff because it results in safety for America. But when things get taken out of context and things get skewed and you have the wrong actors in there, then all of a sudden it gets pretty bad. And when you're having to move it into organizations like this, and it was no surprise to me when I saw this, because we had seen it internally, and it's not just them. There's other NGOs. There's so many organizations out there that people are aware of. Some even, talked about on commercials on TV where you should donate money, where they're being used for nefarious actions because it hides the hand of the U.S. government. So it doesn't surprise me, and that's just how it works. I mean, rarely is the lion's share of the funding that happens for covert operations doesn't really flow through the agency. It's done through all these cutouts, some of which are portraying themselves as something that they're not.
Drew Berquist, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
MP, when you hear it all just laid out there like that, we know it's all a dirty business, but I feel grimy after that, right? When he explains everything, it's I wish some of these things I just didn't know.
Well, we've been at this game for a long time, and we've been involved in dirty business for a long time. And Drew made a really important point and it's part of what I've been banging on about on the show for a while now, since the mandate started. And that's, some of these functions are valid. You do want, right? You want something that is going to allow the government to both, spy and gather intelligence throughout the world. And you do want to act in a covert manner and have an agency that does that, or some function of the government that does that. So the question now is, as he kind of alludes to this throughout everything Drew just said, there's some good things that people are still doing, right, in the CIA. There's good stuff out there. So how can we reform it in a way where we just achieve those goals and get rid of all the rest with as little grime as possible and clean it up? Man, it's not going to be an easy task.